Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my 2022 fantasy football boom or bust wide receivers. Inside today's video, I'll be discussing 3 wide receivers in depth that I believe are going to be boom or bust players that I am going to be looking to target in my 2022 fantasy football drafts, as well as in my 2022 best ball drafts. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help us out a ton. And if you would like to follow me on Twitter, please do so at Notorious FNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into my boom bust wide receivers of today's video. So we'll begin with Mike Williams, wide receiver of the LA Chargers, underdog ADP, currently the wide receiver number 13 off the board at pick 28.1. Now, Mike Williams is going to be one of those wide receivers whose ADP is drastically different when you are doing best ball drafts on Underdog compared to in your redraft league, because in best ball, people are wanting to get that stack. If they have to commit highly to Justin Herbert in, say, the 3rd or 4th round, they are going to pull the trigger significantly earlier on Mike Williams to complete that stack. Whereas in a redraft league, not everyone's mind is on stacking. Not everyone is trying to create these crazy stacks. So Mike Williams is going to go later because he definitely has a lot of risk with him, because he is clearly a boom bust player. There were games last year where Mike Williams legitimately looked like this guy was going to potentially be a top 5 wide receiver all year long. And then there was other games where Mike Williams was doing his best John Cena impression because you couldn't see him. He was not really doing all that much on the field. So that is why Mike Williams is a boom bust player. He has very high upside. He has the upside to win you your week, to put your team on his back and take you to the promised land. But he also has the downside of when he plays bad, it could look like an unmitigated disaster to your roster, and he could really hurt you in terms of redraft, which isn't much of a worry in best ball, because if you draft him and he ends up having a couple of bad games, then guess what? He's not going to show up in your roster for those bad games. But in a redraft, it is very hard to decipher which weeks you wanted to start Mike Williams last year, because he would dominate up against a bad defense, then he'd play a great defense and dominate, and then the next week he'd play up against a terrible defense and just look terrible. So last year, I will just read off his finish on the week on a per game basis. So week 1 against Washington, 14th at wide receiver. Week 2 against Dallas, he finished wide receiver 10. Week 3 against Kansas City, wide receiver 1. Week 4 up against the Raiders, wide receiver 105. Week 5 up against Cleveland, wide receiver 2. Week 6 against Baltimore, 73. Week 8 against the Patriots, 78. 9 against the Philadelphia Eagles, 46. 10 up against the Vikings, 45, 11 up against the Steelers, wide receiver 10. So he bounces back after having a horrific stretch of games, and they're thinking, you know what, maybe that was just a bad stretch. Maybe everything will go back to being normal after this Pittsburgh game where he's wide receiver 10, and then up against Denver, he finishes wide receiver 50, wide receiver 20, wide receiver 40, 46, 20, and 7. The good for Mike Williams is fucking amazing. The bad for Mike Williams is burning a hole in your roster. So in best ball, while you have to pay a premium price for Mike Williams, I am fine doing it because those big games are so big, because he has that 30, 35 plus point upside that you can't really find later on in your fantasy football draft. And he is linked to one of the best, one of the most supreme offenses in the NFL. Justin Herbert, the pervert, loves to throw the ball to Mike Williams, and Mike Williams is a very talented wide receiver. And if Mike Williams maybe is able to shed this quote-unquote boom or bust tag, meaning maybe this year he's a little bit more consistent, then Mike Williams could easily finish as a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy football. Last year, playing in 16 games, he finished as the wide receiver 10.5 PPR and the wide receiver number 12.5 PPR points per game, tied with Mr. T. Higgins. He had 129 targets, 8.1 per game, ranking 14th at wide receiver, 76 receptions, 4.8 per game, 24th, 1,146 receiving yards, 71.6 per game, 11th, and 9 total touchdowns, 10th at the wide receiver position. So in terms of a best ball draft, you're going to have to pay a pretty penny to acquire Mike Williams. I understand there's going to be weeks where things go bad. Probably, unless, of course, like I said, he just sheds the boomer bust tag and magically he's amazing this year. I think he's probably going to be more of that boomer bust player, but when he does boom, he is going to be fantastic for your team. So I like Mike Williams at best ball, and I'm fine drafting him at his ADP. If it was a redraft league and someone took him at pick 28.1, I would be laughing at them because I think that's fucking ridiculous. In redraft, you can get him a bunch of picks later, and I'm still fine taking Mike Williams, just not at that ADP in a normal redraft league. The next player to discuss here is wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks, DK Metcalf. Now, there's a lot of noise going around right now that DK Metcalf's quarterback is not actually going to be Drew Lock. It's not going to be Geno Smith. It is going to be Jimmy Guap, Jimmy G-Spot, Jimmy Garoppolo. And is that going to 100% be the case? Probably not, right? It's not a locked and loaded thing because he's still on the 49ers. Jimmy Garoppolo has not been traded yet, but there is a chance that DK Metcalf's quarterback week number 1 is going to end up being Jimmy Garoppolo. Will that help DK Metcalf? Will that hurt DK Metcalf? That is certainly up for debate. Let me know down below in the comment section what you think about that. Metcalf is currently coming off the board as the wide receiver 24 on Underdog Fantasy at pick 50.8 in 2021, playing in 17 games. He finished as the wide receiver number 12 in half PPR and the wide receiver number 19 in half PPR points per game, tied with Hunter Renfrow. He had 129 targets, 7.6 per game, ranking 14th at wide receiver, 75 receptions, 4.4 per game, ranking 25th, 967 receiving yards, falling short of 1,000, not 1,000 mark, 56.9 per game, ranking 25th, and 12 total tugs, 5th at wide receiver. Robert Kraft would love that touchdown number. He just loves getting a bunch of tugs. So looking at his per game numbers, it was pretty clear last year. It's been pretty clear over DK Metcalf's career, just like with Mike Williams, that he's a boomer bust player. Week 1 against Indy, wide receiver 27. Week 2 against Tennessee, wide receiver 46. Week 3 up against the Vikings, wide receiver 6. Week 4 up against San Francisco, 23. Week 5 up against Jalen fucking Ramsey and the Rams, he's wide receiver 9. Then week 6 up against Pittsburgh, wide receiver 33. Week 7 against New Orleans, 12. Week 8 against Jacksonville, number 9. Week 10 up against Green Bay, 52. Followed by wide receiver 54, 91, 30, 55, 26, 35. And then in week 17 up against Detroit, wide receiver 3. So very, very boomer bust, right? Those bad games are really bad, right? Wide receiver 91 against Kendall Fuller and the Washington football team. This guy scores 2 fucking half PPR points. 2 points. But then there's the chance of the big games. But Nick, Russell Wilson got hurt last year. I understand, right? You can attribute some of that to the fact that Russell Wilson got hurt. But you also have to account for that Russell Wilson is now gone. Russell Wilson is now the quarterback of Broncos country. Let's ride. He's the Broncos quarterback, so he is no longer going to be there. It's either going to be horsecock Drew Lock, Geno Smith, or maybe now it's going to be Jimmy Garoppolo. And DK Metcalf, right now, while I wasn't all that high on DK Metcalf, I'm still not all that high on DK Metcalf. At a certain point, the fact that he is just so good is going to outweigh the fact that the quarterback position fucking sucks on his team. The fact that he's now wide receiver 24 and is probably going to keep falling. I want to be taking DK Metcalf because I understand, even with the woes at the quarterback position, that DK Metcalf is such a talented, athletic wide receiver that he is going to make up for it. And the reason why he was so boom bust over the last couple of years was because Russell Wilson kind of just locks into one of the receivers there. If DK Metcalf has a big game, then Tyler Lockett's probably sitting in the corner playing like absolute horse shit. And vice versa can be said. When Tyler Lockett catches these balls that are thrown right into his bread basket, he runs into the end zone, and it's a beautiful throw from Russell Wilson. Then in those games where Lockett's really going off, hitting the gritty in the fucking end zone, I don't think Lockett actually does that, but you get what I'm saying. When he's having that big game, then Metcalf is probably not doing well. And it was very, very annoying because you knew that any given week, one of these guys is potentially going to pop and be a top 5 wide receiver, but you never know which one's going to be. They're both really talented, but once one has that great game, the other one is very unlikely to have a solid game as well. And that could potentially change with Geno Smith, Drew Lock, or Jimmy Garoppolo. Maybe they spread the ball around a little bit more. I think DK Metcalf is going to be just fine. And the fact that he's coming off the board as wide receiver 24 gives me enough confidence to select him, even with, again, the weird situation at quarterback. Let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think about all of these players. We got one more player coming up after I talk to you guys real quick about the sponsor of today's video, Underdog Fantasy. The best place to play fantasy football, these best ball drafts this summer, is going to be Underdog Fantasy. I play on Underdog Fantasy every single day. Basically, when I have the time, I go ahead and squeeze in a draft. The Best Ball Mania 3 tournament has $10 million in total prize money. The regular season winner, the winner of the regular season, will be paid $1 million. The winner at the end of all the playoffs after week 17 will be paid $2 million. There's other prizes as well. Those are just the big talking points, in my opinion. And the best part about Best Ball, the best part about Underdog Fantasy, is that you don't have to worry about waivers on Tuesday, scrambling, typing through a million things, trying to pick up players, skipping through a bunch of tabs. You don't have to worry about trading. You don't have to worry about calling up your friend, trying to negotiate some type of a trade, and he's too busy watching his kid to be able to answer the fucking phone. It's annoying, right? It's annoying. There's no in-season management. You don't have to worry about setting your lineup every week. Underdog will automatically give you the best score each week of the season. So all you got to do is draft your team, and that's it. You can monitor your team throughout the whole season. That's fun. Or you can just draft your team, forget about it, focus on redraft, and then come back at the end of the season and potentially have won a lot of money. Last year's Best Ball Mania champion drafted their team in June, so there's no need to wait. It is currently July 12th. No need to wait. You can draft right now. Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100 when you sign up using promo code AWESOMO, which is good for 4 entries into the Best Ball Mania 3 tournament. If you actually check out the link in the comment section, or not maybe in the comment section, but definitely in the description, you can actually find a link that will be giving you guys our Best Ball package over on Stochastic for free. If you sign up using promo code AWESOMO, if you click the link and you sign up on Underdog, we'll give it to you for free, and you don't even have to deposit $100. I think you just have to deposit the minimum amount. Again, head on over to UnderdogFantasy.com or in the App Store. Click on the link in the description. Use promo code AWESOMO today. So the final player to discuss in today's video, this is one that's going to be a little bit interesting for you guys because it seems like the consensus on this player is very much all over the place. And that is going to be wide receiver, formerly of the Green Bay Packers, now of the Kansas City Chiefs, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Mr. MVS. Underdog ADP wide receiver 44, pick 92.5. Last year in Green Bay, MVS played in 11 total games, finishing as the wide receiver 78.5 PPR, tied with Freddie Swain, and wide receiver 69.5 PPR points per game. Very nice. Wide receiver 69. I thought this was hilarious because you want to know who the other wide receiver 69.5 PPR points per game was? It was Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman, wide receiver 69. Pretty fucking funny. Now that the 69 jokes are over, we got to get a little bit serious here and do a nice deep dive. Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps doesn't dive, but you get what I'm saying, into the numbers when it comes to MVS. So, like I said, wide receiver 78.5 PPR, 69.5 PPR points per game. He had 55 targets, 5 per game. 84th at wide receiver, 26 receptions, 2.4 per game, 98th at wide receiver, 430 receiving yards, 39.1 per game, 83rd at wide receiver, and 3 total tugs, 61st at wide receiver. Last year in Green Bay, MVS very much fit the bill of a boom or bust wide receiver. Week 1 up against the Saints, wide receiver 86. Week 2 up against Detroit, wide receiver 120. He played 20 routes. He ran 20 routes. He had 111 air yards thrown to him. Didn't catch a single fucking pass. Didn't catch a single pass. 0 receiving yards, 0 points. Week 3 up against San Fran, wide receiver 23. Week 9 up against Kansas City, wide receiver 71. Week 10 up against Seattle, wide receiver 57. Week 11 up against Minnesota, wide receiver 6, but then it all kind of went downhill from there. Wide receiver 44, 67. There was a reemergence up against Baltimore in week number 15, where he's wide receiver 8, and then he's wide receiver 108, wide receiver 112 again because he's targeted once. Doesn't catch a single pass in week 18 up against Detroit. So MVS is definitely a boom or bust player in Green Bay, but now he is in Kansas City. He goes from one great quarterback in Mr. Discount Double Check, Mr. Aaron Rodgers, to another great quarterback in Mr. Patty Mahomes. So in Kansas City, there's a lot of players. There's Juju, wide receiver, right? Because we also got to include Travis Kelce. So there's Travis Kelce. There's Mr. Corvette, Juju Smith-Schuster. And then there's obviously Sky Moore. There is Justin Ross, Josh Gordon. There's a lot of fucking cooks in the kitchen in Kansas City. But I believe if MVS emerges, which is possible, at pick 92.5, where you don't have to determine where to fucking, which weeks to play him in best ball, you don't have to determine that. In redraft, it's going to be a little tough. And by a little tough, I mean, I think it's going to be very tough to figure out which Kansas City wide receiver to play every single week, besides Travis Kelce, who's just a lock into your lineup. In best ball, when MVS pops off and has that 25-point game, which is possible in Kansas City, right, where he gets 112 yards, scores a tug, gets a bunch of catches, then MVS is going to go into your lineup, and you don't have to worry about figuring it out, which is why I love him in best ball, because you already have a bunch of other wide receivers on your team that'll just go in your lineup the games where MVS doesn't pop off. But when he does pop off, he's going to show up in your lineup. So I like MVS a ton in best ball, and I think he's going to be a very interesting player to figure out for redraft as well this season. So to recap, my top boom or bust wide receivers to target in your 2022 fantasy football redraft drafts and your best ball drafts is going to be Mike Williams, wide receiver of the LA Chargers, DK Metcalf, wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, wide receiver of the Kansas City Chiefs. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. Again, please make sure you sign up to Underdog promo code AWESOME. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great rest of your guys' day, and as always, good boy!